And welcome, and I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be here. Take it away, Randy.
Well, thank you very much. So let's just start out. Good morning and welcome. My name is Randy Dahman, and on behalf of the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services, I'd like to welcome you to today's training. For those I've had the pleasure of not crossing with, I'm a commercial building plan reviewer for DSPS. I've been working with the division for nearly 31 years. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Engineering and received both an undergraduate and a master's degree. I'm a licensed Wisconsin professional engineer, commercial building inspector, UDC inspector, as well as a licensed HVAC qualifier. This is the second of two identical training sessions. Now, there may be some typos and things that we fix, but they're basically the same. The first was held 2 weeks ago on August 14th. Many of you may have been attending that particular training, and some of you may be attending today's for the first time. Obviously, I'm biased. I like to hear things a couple of times. The first time I'm in the ooh-ah mode and not sure how to handle it. But if I hear it a second time, it kind of settles in. So if you're here for a second time, God bless you. I expect today's training to take roughly 2 to 2.5 hours. Our topics today will be addressing the Wisconsin amendments as associated with the adoption of the 2021 ICC codes. Now, please note, this is not addressing changes from the published ICC suites. In other words, we're not going to look at the IBC and what was published in the 2015 versus what was published in the 2021. That isn't part of this training. This training is only looking at the Wisconsin amendments that will be applicable for use with the 2021 ICC code suites. If the licensed professionals wonder why you seem to be so busy in the office, as well as in the field, I'd like to share with you the following, which I recently found as I was moving my desk from the 3rd floor to what is now the 2nd floor. So I had some data from 2004. In 2004, there were 4,872 architects licensed in the state of Wisconsin. In 2025, there were 5,064, or if you will, just short of 4% increase. It doesn't sound too bad. In 2004, there were 19,600 professional engineers licensed in Wisconsin. And in 2025, that number has been reduced by 18% to 16,125. So from 19,600 to 16,125 for professional engineer licenses, a reduction. Along those same lines, in 2004, there were 1,032 engineered system licenses in Wisconsin, and in 2025, those are down to 798, or if you will, a 23% reduction in licenses. So when you take all three of these groups, who are the individuals who are able to stamp commercial building plans, you take all three together, there's been an overall drop of 14% in the number of Wisconsin professional licenses viable for use with the design of a commercial building as issued by the state of Wisconsin since 2004. A little trivia. For those who like history, the Wisconsin Commercial Building Code is the longest in place commercial building code in the United States, something we should take great pride in. The code has been established since 1914, or if you will, been in place for 111 years. Wisconsin first adopted the use of the Code Council suites on July 1st, 2002, and with the adoption of the 2021 ICC codes, this will be the 6th adoption of ICC codes. Prior to that, many of you experienced licensed professional will remember that the Wisconsin Code was written and maintained by simply the state of Wisconsin. As many of you know, the department has adopted various versions of the ICC codes, but with each version there are included what has been referenced as Wisconsin amendments. These are changes from the published code that the state of Wisconsin, based on its extensive years of adoption, has included so as to modify the adopted ICC codes. One common reason for the inclusion of the Wisconsin amendments involves the need to address adopted state laws and statutes. In other words, because they're on our books, we have a definition of what a dwelling unit is. And yes, there's a definition of a dwelling unit in the IBC, but our statutes are the law of the state of Wisconsin, and therefore our definition is found in the statutes have to be followed. Another reason that the amendments are included as part of the code is that based on Wisconsin's extensive years of experience, certain actions have proven themselves and thus are included in the code. And if I might say, in general, the majority of the Wisconsin amendments that we will be discussing today actually make the application of the code less restrictive. I remind everyone that the Wisconsin Commercial Building Code is a set of minimum requirements for the health, safety, welfare of the people of Wisconsin. The code is not a design manual, although some people think it is. Said in a more frank way, you cannot have a building design any worse than the minimums of the Wisconsin Commercial Building Code legally. Think about it. Again, as we will not be addressing changes in the published 2021 ICC codes versus those requirements that were published in 2015. We will be addressing only the Wisconsin amendments to be used with the 2021 ICC suite of codes. Wow, having said all that, let's move ahead and address the topic at hand. I'm going to have to do a little hand washing here, so bear with me here. Etta, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, hang on here. There we go. Now let's clean this up a little bit. All right. So this is a straightforward power presentation. We'll talk about a lot of topics here. Please feel to take some notes. We will be discussing, obviously, all of the Wisconsin amendments, etc., at the UW Code Refresher coming up in late February. Many organizations throughout the state are having ICC officials to train on the differences between the 2015 published codes versus those of the published code related to the 2021 adopted codes. So, how did we get here? Well, in general, the Commercial Building Code Committee listened to thoughts and recommendations and reviewed them and came up with what they felt were viable applications for use with the 2021 ICC suite of codes. Public hearing dates were held in late April in 2023. Comments from that public hearing were then directed back to the committee, and they made any modifications as they deemed necessary. The final proposed version of the code was then signed off by the department and directed to the legislature for approval and adoption. And as many of you know, there was a legislative hold that was recently released. Now, at this time, the implementation date is September 1. That's when the Legislative Revisers Bureau will be issuing the Wisconsin amendments per se. Now, from a department standpoint, in the month of September, if you submit plans to the department in the month of September, we will assume that they will fall under the 2015, or if you will, the current code for the month of September. Now, in some cases, some of you may wish, for whatever reason, to incorporate the design of the and requirements of the 2021 ICC suites in your design. And if you do that, if you submit them in September, we will honor that request with no petition. with that in mind, the absolute drop dead date, so to speak, on use of the 2015 code will be the end of September. On October 1st, any plans initiating a project, I'll go over that shortly, will be required to be addressed using the 2021 code. Now, where's that line in the sand? We'll talk about it here. So let's frame this a little bit. The topics and discussions contained in this presentation could change on the final actions as taken by the LRB, the Legislative Revisers Bureau. The LRB has final say. We can send things up there, but what they do is make sure if there's a table 1004, then indeed that reference table 1004 is part of the code. If we reference a subsection 36103 parens 3, well, there better be one within the code. They make sure that it makes sense, that the English is appropriate, make sure all the grammatical issues and the typographical errors are all corrected. So at this time, since we don't have a final version, and please note that's the department does not have access to that. That's LRB. This is a preliminary code summary, and there could be changes. We'll see what happens. Now, as far as the presentation, if current Wisconsin amendments were simply renumbered, I'm not going to talk about it here. I'm not going to waste your time. You already know what the amendment was. You've been using it since May 1st of 2018. Additionally, there are situations where there were some amendments removed. I'm also not addressing those. I'm looking mainly at new amendments that are completely new, and if they're of importance and a Wisconsin amendment was removed and it affects significantly your design, I will point that out within this discussion. So how do we apply the 2015 versus, say, the 2021? If you have a new building and plans initiating the building submittal, in other words, what is initiating the building submittal? Well, a building submittal is initiated with footing and foundation plans or building plans. And those plans are placed into ISLA on behalf of the department, or if you're going through your local municipality, it would be directed in their hands, okay, for review prior to the date of implementation. So if you have plans, you get it into ISLA, or if you get it to the local municipality with a complete plan set. Don't send a paper napkin with a bunch of doodles, take a PDF and send it to the state. We'll deny it. We need complete plans. We need plans. We need calculations. And as appropriate, specifications. We need a complete plan set. If that isn't the case, then don't upload it because we're going to deny it anyway. So if it's in the hands of the department before the date of implementation, which in this case is October 1st, then all future related plans required to be submitted for review as based on the commercial building code would be based on the current code, not the future code. So for instance, I have footing and foundation plans and or building plans. I'm not sure which I'm going to send, but I submit a complete set, calculation, specs, the whole thing, properly stamped, everything required, directed it to the department before October 1st. That initiates the project. So as many of you know, the building or footing and foundation comes in, say it's footing and foundation, maybe the building plans come in November. Well, since the project was initiated before October 1st, then the building plans can follow using the 2015. The HVAC, which might not come till January or February, can follow the 2015. The sprinkler and fire alarm plans that ensue very likely shortly after that, which might be April of next year, can still use the 2015 code because the project was initiated before October 1st. That would also include trusses and precast. Okay, in other words, the components plans. What this does not include is the preliminary consultations. So for instance, if a preliminary consultation is allowed by the department is where an engineer, architect, a building designer in general wants to talk to the department. They have something unique. They're not sure how to apply the code. There's a lot of very good justifications for preliminary consultations. I had one just recently. It involved a 3-story existing building, and they were putting an addition on. Now, initially you go, probably not big deal. And then, as Paul Harvey used to say, there's the rest of the story. They were adding 6 stories to the 3-story building. You can see where that might get a little challenging unless the original building was designed for 6 more stories to go on top of it, which indeed this particular one did. But again, that's not your normal or standard practice building addition. So they wanted to talk to the department, and we discussed it thoroughly, and they knew exactly where they needed to go without having to completed plans and go back and redesign it. That's the value of preliminary. But please note, that is not the initiation of the project. The initiation happens when we have a full, complete set of plans, either footing and foundation or building plans. That preliminary consultation might take years before it finally comes to us in fruition of plans. So that does not initiate the project. So as I stated, those related plans that were associated with the start of the project would include HVAC, kitchen hood, precast, truss, lighting, fire suppression, fire alarm. All of those would likely be directed to the department at a later time after the implementation date. When follow-up plans to a building project are submitted, the person submitting the follow-up plans is required to have the original parent permit number associated with the building plan approval. So many of you have seen the CB number, it's short for commercial building. That is the parent permit number. So when you get that associated with your footing and foundation or your building plan, that's the basis that I go to as a plan reviewer. I get the heating plans and I go back to that base because that's my building plan. It's going to tell me where all the fire rated rooms are, fire rated assemblies, etc., which as a building designer, you need to identify, right? And don't just give me a door schedule of fire rated doors. I expect to see not only 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour fire ratings clearly identified, but I also expect them to be called out as fire partitions, fire barriers, and or fire walls. Both need to be addressed. I can't tell you the number of plans that I get that only give me a fire rated door schedule, and I'm supposed to guess all the rest. You have to remember the HVAC guys have to use your plans, and they need to know how to penetrate the wall. And when you don't tell them if it's a fire partition, a fire barrier, fire wall, they don't know how to address that opening as associated with their duct penetration. So make sure you got complete plans. So if the building plans were submitted prior to the implementation date for, say, a shell or a specification building, and the building was completed. So here's our box. It's just an empty box. It's got 4 walls and a ceiling. There's nothing in it. There's no tenant. And then at a later time, the building alteration plans are submitted to address the tenant build out. Maybe it's 1 tenant, maybe it's 2 tenants, but it's after the completion of the building. Then the code applicable to that alteration is based on when the building alteration plans are received, not when the shell or the spec building plans were submitted. Okay. And again, when those tenant spaces are submitted, whenever that gets initiated with the building plan, then all the ensuing HVAC, sprinkler, fire alarm, etc. plans would be based on the date of the building alteration plan when it was received. Okay. Note it's not when it was approved. I'll say again, it is not based on when the plan is approved. It's based on when it is received in its completion by the department. Again, don't give us paper napkins with doodles that you made a PDF on to get your foot in the door, because we're not going to accept that. We need complete plans submitted to the department. And when there's complete plans, that's when we'll identify it as acceptable under the code in which it was submitted. Now, in some cases, obviously, we don't have building plans. There are situations where all I'm going to do is add a new kitchen hood to an existing building. There's other situations where I might have fire alarm system that's failing, and we're going to upgrade it. There's going to be no building alteration. This is just a standalone fire alarm plan, fire suppression plan, maybe even an HVAC plan. If that's the case, if it's a standalone plan, then the application of the code is based on a complete plan when it's received by the department. So if you have an HVAC plan and it's provided before October 1st, we can certainly continue to review it under the 2015 code based on the date in which it was received. For those of you who may not be familiar with the way the ICC codes are written, note that after you purchase your ICC codes, you'll find that there's indicators on the side. Now, when you look at the code, you'll see some solid lines, and those indicate some kind of technical change from the 2018 edition. Now, note, we're going from the 2015 code to the 2021 code. So those changes from 2015 to 2018 are not part of that. They are looking from the last edition, which in this case was the 2018, to get to the 2021. So not everything's marked. I'm going to tell you that right now. But if you see a solid line, there's a technical change. If you see an arrow, there's some kind of a deletion. You know, either a paragraph, maybe a line, maybe a word, something's been deleted. Now, if you see asterisks, that implies that either text or table has been relocated in the building code. Let me give you an example. Many of you are familiar with the current code under table 602 for fire separation distance. It gives you a fire rating depending on the construction type and the occupancy. We've known it as table 602 since our initial adoption back in 2002. Well, that table is relocated. It hasn't been lost, although you'll think it's lost because you're going to look there and it's not there anymore. It's in 705.5. So you're going to see a single asterisk where 602 was, and you're going to find a double asterisk in the margin where it's been relocated, in this case 705.5. So just an example. So what's our intent today? Well, the major intent is to highlight the major, not necessarily all, Wisconsin amendments that have occurred from 2015 to 2021. The idea is to understand the key changes from each ICC discipline and then highlight how these changes will affect enforcement, design, and construction. So here you are, you're hearing the first things about the 2021 code. In order to prepare plans under the 2021 code, you need the right references. So this is by no means a priority in any way. It's just items that you need to have available to you. Obviously, a copy of the codes. 2021 ICC, the building energy code, mechanical fuel gas, and existing building code, and in some cases, fire code as necessary. Note that I'm going to provide you a place that you can view it for free. That's a 4-letter word. Don't worry about it. It doesn't get anyone mad. Online that you can view if you don't have the 2021 codes readily at your fingertips. But I would strongly encourage you to purchase them because it does take a while to get back, whether it's a soft cover book or a 3-ring binder, or in some cases you may choose an electronic version. So the 2021 code, and then of course our amendments, which are not yet finalized. They'll be coming out here shortly. Accessibility. ANSI A117.1 is now going updated to the 2017. And please note, bathrooms get larger. No, that's not a mistake. That's true. Bathrooms will get larger with the adoption of the 2021 codes. So if you're involved in future designs, using the 2021 code, make sure you get a copy of this because quite frankly, it's going to be an important factor in the design of your building because it's going to take more floor for your bathrooms for accessibility purposes. NFPA 54 2021 is going to be adopted for use with the gas systems, Chapter 4 of the International Fuel Gas Code. ASHRAE 90.1 2019 will be the reference in lieu of the ASHRAE 90.1 2013 version we're currently using. For those who are involved in sprinkler design, NFPA 13, 13R, and 13D, D for domestic, 2019 will be the basis of design. NFPA 72 2019 is also being updated for addition. Other items of note, more of concern to the building side, ASCE 7 has been updated to the 2016 version. I want to point out here that for you designers who are going to be using the 2021 code, don't use the computer programming that you purchased 10 years ago for use with the 2015 code, which is based on ASCE 7 2010. Don't do that. That'll be an automatic hold. And as I call it, a learning experience. Need to have all calculations based upon the requirements of the code we're adopting, which is the 2021 ICC code suite. So that includes and is not limited to ASCE 7 2016. Don't have calculations that aren't based on the 2016. Additionally, for those of you who get involved in fire-rated assemblies, make sure you have a full picture of your assembly and full description. Just don't put down a number. The guy out in the field isn't going to know what the number is. Give an assembly on the plan defining what the materials are, how it's supposed to be fastened, what the spacing is, right? All that important factual items. A wonderful place to get that is the Gypsum Board Association. They have a soft cover book that addresses fire resistance as well as sound control design, which is applicable to not only residential for those of you who have already done that in the past, but in addition, those of you who are involved in schools and education. Sound control now will be part of the building code on that. It's in chapter 12. Other items to note from the building design side is the NDS requirements now been updated to the 2018 version for wood construction. And I want to point out, of course, because of the code, excuse me, because of the code, we have to update our various exams. We have commercial building inspector exams, we have HVAC qualifier exams, and we have HVAC designer exams, in which I'm particular to because I have to provide oversight for those. We have to go through all the exam questions, okay? And in doing so, and in relation to this NDS, there was a question recently about a header. There's a prescriptive table in the building code, in the wood chapter, which provides a quick and dirty lookup for minimum header sizes. And under the 2015 code, a particular question required that two 2x10s were required to be installed for load-bearing purposes above a door. When we went to the 2021 code, those two 2x10s were required to be two 2x12s. So don't think it's the same old, same old. My point here is you need to get the most recent version of the appropriate design manual as adopted by the 2021 ICC codes. In the case of the building code, you can find all adopted standards in chapter 35. In addition to wood, of course, we have to deal with concrete and steel, and you can see here that the concrete design ACI 318 is now the 2019 version, and for structural steel buildings, it's AISC 360 2016. And then for those of you involved in insulating the building, ASHRAE fundamentals will be the basis for establishing our values if you're going to use defaults. Licenses. As part of this code adoption, we've incorporated new licenses. Specifically, those licenses are to certify individuals for fire detection, prevention, and suppression inspection. Now, they're not a complete commercial building inspector, but rather they're only looking at three very specific areas: fire detection, prevention, and suppression inspector. Now, these licenses, for the most part, will be ascertained by Local fire officials work for various fire departments, whether they're permanent workers or maybe voluntary workers. As many of you may or may not know, the fire code, SPS Chapter 314, requires that yearly fire inspections take place in commercial buildings. And this is where the fire department gets into buildings and they verify that the exit signs are working, that the fire suppression equipment is been properly checked, and the records that go with that, that there hasn't been damage to the fire alarm system, etc. But now there is now a license to give them the ability to write orders on fire detection, prevention, and suppression systems, just like that of a commercial building inspector. Finally, we get to the code itself. So this is a commercial building code. What is a commercial building? I mean, what makes a building a commercial building versus a dwelling building versus a barn? Okay. Well, there's 3 criteria, and it's in our state statutes. The first criteria is that it's a place of employment. So if you got people working for you, for instance, right now in my building, I got a bunch of fellow state workers. Many of you may be working in schools. Some of you might be working in an engineering company. Some of you might be a contractor. Places of employment. That's a commercial building. Second criterion that may make a building commercial for application and use of the Wisconsin Commercial Building Code would be a place where the public ingresses into a building or egresses out of a building. So for example, I have a church. Okay. Priest comes in, or rabbi, or whomever, the leader comes in, he presents, provides mass or an event. The public enters the building, and when he's done, it leaves. Not really a place of employment per se, but clearly a place in which the public enters and leaves the building. That building is a commercial building. Horse stables is another one, where the public, if the public enters the building and leaves the building, it might not be a place of employment, right? It might be just owned by the owner, right? It's just a one-person ownership. But if he allows the public into the building, it becomes a commercial building. Greenhouse is another one, right? Greenhouse, if you're just creating food or agricultural crop per se, flowers, etc., that could be deemed as agricultural. But if you allow the public to enter the greenhouse, that now becomes a commercial building, and now the commercial building code applies, rather than maybe treating it as a farm premises. So we got place of employment, we got place where the public enters or leaves, and the third item is 3 tenants or more. This is all by state statute. So 3 tenants or more, where's that come from? Well, in Wisconsin, we have a 1 and 2 family code, dwelling code. That's for 1 and 2 family dwellings, right? So if you have a duplex, it falls under that code. If you have a single home, family home, that falls under that code. But if you have 3 entities, say 3 row houses or townhouses or more, it falls under the commercial code. If you'd have 2 commercial occupancies, maybe business, maybe an assembly, and a residential, that's 3 tenants. That building in its entirety now falls under the commercial building code, inclusive of the residential tenant, because you have 3 tenants or more. And this is not to confuse the situation, but if you had 2 tenants and one was a commercial tenant, an assembly, maybe a mercantile, maybe a business, just one, and you had another one that was residential in nature, so there's 2 tenants. Well, the residential is not a place of employment. The residential is not a place where the public enters. Thus, and it does not have 3 tenants, because I just said it only has 2. We have a commercial business of some sort or other occupancy and the residence. Thus, in that scenario where there's 2 tenants, one of which is residential, the building shall falls under the commercial building code. The commercial tenant, business, mercantile, factory, assembly, whatever it may be. That finish out falls under the commercial code. However, the residential tenant falls under the uniform dwelling code for finish out. So again, so we are dealing with the commercial code. You meet those three criteria, you have a commercial building, and the commercial building code applies, unless you meet an exception. And now, here we are. New exceptions added as per state statute. An exception that's been included, this includes buildings located in research or laboratory farms of public universities or other state institutions used primarily for housing livestock or other agricultural purposes per the state statutes. So that's a new language that was added by our representatives in the legislature. And also included in the statutes is an exception for rural school buildings under the conditions set by the statutes. Now, rural school building is a one-story, one-room rural school addressed by a bona fide religious denomination. So if you have that criterion, you may be exempt of application of the commercial building code. And another exception that's been added to the code is a micro school. And of course, we go on to define what a micro school is, but a micro school for 8 or fewer students enrolled in pre-kindergarten through grade 12, if the school is located in a home or dwelling unit that falls under the scope of the Uniform Dwelling Code. SPS 320 is the administrative chapter of the Uniform Dwelling Code. Now, temporary use is pretty common across the state. You know, you want to use a building temporarily for a limited time. You work with either the local fire department or the local commercial building inspector, if indeed there is a commercial building inspector. There's a lot of rural communities where there is no local inspector, so thus you go to the fire department. So, for temporary use, the official shall determine the time frame within which the temporary use is permitted based on the extent of hazards are created by the temporary use. This time frame may not exceed 180 consecutive days, except for the official may grant extensions for demonstrated cause. And you see the highlight here is consecutive. The department had always maintained the application of this section with the intent that it was consecutive days, but there was some various interpretations as to application here, and thus we clarified it with the addition of the word consecutive. As you see here in wedding barns, many of you have heard us talk about this in the past, but there's been some challenges with wedding barns. And of course, temporary use, as this was written, was 180 days. The intent was 180 consecutive days, thus it's going to be clarified. So formally, if I would say, hey, I'm only using my barn as a temporary use on Saturday and Sundays, 52 weeks a year, I'd have 104 days, which is less than 180. Therefore, I'm clear for a year. But with this language, this limits it to 180 days, or if you will, roughly 6 months. Now note, locals with a temporary use can remove that temporary use at any time. They could issue it today and take it away tomorrow. They could issue it today and in 3 days come back and say, you need to do X, Y, and Z and change the criterion of that temporary use. Can they do that? Yes. Temporary use is addressed at the local level based upon what the locals feel is required for life safety for that temporary use. International Fire Code. Now, this section of the Administrative Code 361.03.14 addresses when the fire code is applicable, specifically the International Fire Code, the IFC. Now, in the adopted code suites, the IBC makes several references to the application or reference and use of the International Fire Code. Before you do that, make sure you go to this section, because this tells you what sections of the fire code can or cannot be used. So if you go to the building code and let's just say high piled combustible storage, That's IBC 413, and I know it's going to direct you to the International Fire Code. Before I go to the Fire Code and apply it, I go to the Fire Code, find out what chapters involve the application of high pile combustible storage. Then I come to this section, and if that code chapter in the Fire Code is listed, I apply it. If it is not, I don't. So there's various reasons one might use chapters in the Fire Code, and A, B, C, and D, as I've listed here, there's design and construction related requirements. And then you can see here, I didn't list all the sections because it's kind of a long list here. But you have design and construction. You also have occupant loads, which really hasn't changed from those in the building code. We also have construction inspections and reports as addressed in the IFC. But note, they may be performed or compiled by any qualified agency rather than by a special inspector. Now, for instance, we don't have special licenses yet in the state of Wisconsin. So if you can show your competence in verification of concrete pour via slump tests and your abilities in having the testing equipment for welds and steel verification, you could be a viable agency or representative for performing construction inspections and reports. We'll have more on that later. The key here is that it doesn't necessarily have to have a license per se, but you do need to demonstrate competence and qualification. The fourth item is use and operation provisions for the building. And if the code sections or chapter sections of the IFC are listed, well, then you apply those sections as appropriate for your building design. There are global deletions throughout the code here as identified under parens 15 and G. In general, I want to make clear the state of Wisconsin does not require occupancy permits. You can get into a state building, a county building, and not have an occupancy permit per se. We don't issue them. On the other hand, local municipalities may choose by local ordinance to require the future tenant to obtain a certificate of occupancy. If that's part of their local ordinance, they can do that and make sure that you follow that and don't get in conflict with the locals. Now, if you're going to get involved with fire and smoke dampers, if they're required because of your building design, the initial inspection and testing for the fire and smoke dampers are required based on NFPA 1, NFPA 80, and NFPA 105. Now, NFPA 1, for your reference, if you didn't know, is the basis of the state's fire code, SPS Chapter 314. Now, that's the basis of the fire code locals, and this is where you have to check locally. The local fire department may choose to ignore NFPA 1 and adopt a version of the International Fire Code. And it could be any edition. It might not just be the 2021. It might be the 2024, the most recent. It might be an older standard. It might be 2009. Check with your locals. Anyway, the testing needs to be done by a person with a current life safety certification from a program accredited by the American National Standards Institute, or if you will, ANSI, for those of you more familiar with that. Just a reminder as you go through the building code, if you see any reference to the IPC, or if you will, the International Plumbing Code, note that that implies the Wisconsin Plumbing Code, chapters 381 to 387. If you see reference to the IPSC, remember that is referencing the International Private Sewage Code. We don't adopt that in this state, but we do have the Wisconsin Plumbing Code and Private On-Site Wastewater Treatment Systems Code, as again addressed by chapters 381 to 387. Lastly, there is the International Residential Code, the IRC. We don't adopt it here in Wisconsin for either our 1 and 2 family code nor for the commercial building code. But if it is referenced in the building code or any other of the code suites, they are referencing Wisconsin's Uniform Dwelling Code, chapters 320 through 325. Now there's some new definitions. Modular commercial building element means any modular commercial building, modular multifamily dwelling, modular commercial building system, modular multifamily dwelling system, and on it goes. Formerly, the state of Wisconsin had two separate codes, the way the legislature had created their approvals. One was for commercial buildings and one was for multifamily dwellings. They were two completely independent codes. Many of you may have remembered the old Chapter 66, Iller Chapter 66 or COM 66. The legislature combined those two, so now it's under one hat, and thus now we're just calling it a commercial building. And in updating the language of our code, we also updated some of the requirements, and we'll get into that here shortly. As I implied earlier, multifamily dwelling has a legislative definition, and thus we have to use their definition, not that of the International Building Code. If you haven't seen the 2021 codes, this is what they look like. The building, energy code, mechanical, fuel, gas, and the existing building code. And remember, these are the codes that are going to be applicable along with these Wisconsin amendments as of October 1st. Now, some changes were made to the plan review approval. They created a new exemption. It's for single-story buildings and single-story buildings and structures of less than 1,000 feet located in individual parcels or lease sites at Wisconsin State Fair Park. Now, this reference to Wisconsin State Fair Park is Milwaukee and Milwaukee only. Permission to start. A PTS, many of you are familiar with. It allows you to get started early. I'm going to expand on this because we have a lot of people who don't seem to understand the limitations of this permission to start. It is not an allowance to start anything you want at your discretion. It is only allowed for footings and foundations, i.e. construction at grade or below. That's it. Don't send in a permit to start for HVAC system alteration on the second floor or the installation of additional windows on the first floor. That is not what a permit to start is for, and if we know about it, we'll deny it. It is only for footings and foundations. Now, what we did here is we modified it, this particular section, to identify not only a building owner, but a building owner's representative. I mean, you take a very large chain, we are not going to get the building owner personally. We're going to get a representative. It's just not reasonable to go all the way to the owner on some of these very, very large corporate chains. So we've modified the language to be more realistic, to say, hey, we'll accept a building owner's representative request. Okay. This is one that I believe the design and contractor group should appreciate. We've changed the validity of an approved plan from 1 year to 2 years if it involves an alteration. So if you have an interior building alteration, you're going to make some changes, you're going to move some walls, we're going to create some new rooms, spaces, conference areas, etc. That plan, instead of being good for 1 year, will be good for 2 years from the date of approval. Similarly, if you have alterations to HVAC, fire alarm, fire sprinkler, etc., you have a 2-year approval date for that alteration. Now, we talked about approval and inspection of modular commercial building elements, maybe not the approval and inspection, but we did talk about the modular commercial building elements and how we combine commercial buildings and multifamily and put them into one. If you're not familiar with the system, as you can see here, what they do, and there's a real advantage, is that they construct these modules, as you see here, it looks like a box, in a factory. where conditions are controlled, right? You don't have to worry about the wind. You don't have to worry about the rain. You don't have to worry about the snow falling. You don't have to worry about being 20 below zero. It's built in a factory. It's thrown on an 18-wheeler. It's taken to the site. A crane lifts it up, puts it in place, and it's properly fastened. Basically, it's a modular commercial building. And there's some advantages to that. Not saying that everybody has to do it. They don't. It's an option. And of course, when these boxes are constructed in a factory, we want to know that they're being constructed per the requirements of the code, because necessarily, on-site inspection by our inspector. So there's some requirements, a compliance assurance program, the criterion of the sale, the installation, etc., that needs to be procured if this option is chosen. Now, when we adopted the 2015, we incorporated the option for the design community without a petition for variance to use a newer version of the model codes. So in 2015, you could have used maybe the 2018, the 2021, or even the 2024 without a Wisconsin petition for variance being submitted and approved. However, you have to follow the published code as written. There are no Wisconsin amendments. You have to, if that's the choice you make, and you certainly can do that, know that there are no Wisconsin amendments that are applicable. And again, I emphasize Wisconsin amendments typically reduce the requirements of the code. We clarified this situation as to what the fees would be through what is now parenthesis B, and the fees are to be subject to 302.51 for a new approval for an alternate standard, which is exempt from the petition for variance requirements. So as we go to 302.51, you'll see here's the new approval. It's an alternate standard, and thus the cost is $1,200. Certified municipalities and counties have their own set of rules of what they can and cannot inspect and or review. And depending if they're just delegated or maybe a second class city, maybe even a first class city, such as the city of Milwaukee, there are obligations and limitations to what they can or cannot do, depending on where they fit in that. One of the elements that was modified by the state statute is what can be examined by a delegated municipality. And so you can see the change in the language here. It provides a little bit more flexibility from an enforcement standpoint for locals. And this has been out for several years. It's just that we finally got it into the code with this particular adoption. So an alteration to a space involving less than 100,000 cubic feet of volume is allowed to be reviewed by a local delegation. Now, note, if I had a building, a distribution building of 1.2 million square feet, okay, if the alteration is 100,000 cubic feet or less, the locals can do it, okay, even in that massive building, because it's considered to be small enough. We have some new definitions: fuel burning appliance, high pilot combustible storage. Basically, high pilot combustible storage is 12 feet, greater than 12 feet with combustible storage. There are some exceptions where you get into tires where 6 feet is the limitation for high pilot combustible storage. We have reference to sealed combustion appliance and what a toilet room is. We also have a new definition for what a commercial motor vehicle is. And it's not new. It's been, for those of you who've been aware of frequently asked question, we've had it on our website, but now we've incorporated it into the code, and it's based upon state statutes. Commercial motor vehicle has the meaning given in state statute 340.018. It does not include fire apparatus. So for those of you who design or involved in the construction of a fire department, the fire apparatus trucks are not considered to be commercial. Okay, and why is that important? Why this big distinction? Well, when you go to 903.210 in the building code, you'll find that a commercial parking garage that exceeds 5,000 feet for a fire area is required to be sprinklered. On the other hand, if you just have a general parking garage, the fire area can be as large as 12,000 feet before the need for sprinklering is triggered. So that's the reason for this definition for clarity purposes. Aircraft hangars, floor surfaces need to be made of materials as allowed by 40624, and obviously that number doesn't mean a whole lot. So in general, what it is, it just says that the floor has to be concrete or other approved non-combustible, non-absorbent materials. We don't want gasoline sinking into the dirt. We don't want to have cracked, loose materials where the antifreeze goes into the soil and contaminates your well water. Okay, so this is just a clarification. For those of you who get involved in those unique buildings which I talked about, where instead of 3 tenants you might have 2 tenants, where you have a commercial tenant space next to a single residential space, the building shell is commercial, the commercial space finish out falls under the commercial code, but that single tenant, assuming it's residential, falls under the Uniform Dwelling Code. If that's the case, there needs to be a separation wall between the 2 occupants, 2 tenants. And with this language, it will be more restrictive as defined by the Commercial Building Code than that of the UDC. The Commercial Code now is going to require a complete 1-hour assembly. If you read the UDC, they have a pseudo, it's not a 1-hour assembly. It's similar to it, but it's not recognized as a full 1-hour assembly. The Commercial Code will be more restrictive. It is the code that needs to be applied. You need to have a full 1-hour separation between tenant spaces under those unique conditions. Firewalls, right? We want to separate buildings. We want to create, we have one structure, but we're going to create 2 unique buildings for purposes of code enforcement. That's what a firewall does. So there's different ways to address horizontal continuity. The most common way is to extend a 1-hour fire-rated assembly with a length of 4 feet in 2 directions on each side of the intersection of the firewall. The other option is to use an imaginary line at the firewall. And I'll give you examples here shortly. What we've done is added to this, and we've now allowed the design community to extend the firewall 4 feet in any one direction. So let's just take a look at that. As we see here in the upper left, here's an exterior wall, here's an exterior wall, here's my firewall. It ends right at the corner. Right, here's my corner. Firewall ends. The first option is to extend 4 feet out with a 1-hour rated assembly, right? 4 feet in each direction. And if you poke a hole in it for whatever reason, whether it's a window or a door or some other, you need to have protection, 3/4 hour protection. The second option is where you define an imaginary light line. Now, you can make this 15 degrees, you can make this 45, you can make this 65. Designers, you make it whatever you want. But basically what you're going to do is create an imaginary lot line, and depending on how far you are, right, table 705.8 is going to allow you certain limitations as far as openings, windows and doors. So that's 705.8. Additionally, what we used to look at, right, table 602 in the building code, which is now table 705.5 in the 2021 code, would have a fire rating based on your distance to the lot line, which in this case is an imaginary lot line. So this is another option. Don't see it very often, mainly see this. But we as a department have allowed a 4-foot extension as shown here. So here's my firewall. It would have normally just ended right here where the intersection occurred. We're just going to extend the firewall out. So instead of a 1-hour scenario, if this is a 2-hour, 3-hour, 4-hour firewall, that same fire rating is going to extend 4 feet. So it's a new option. Like I said, we've approved it before, but now it's formalized. For those on the HVAC side, we didn't adopt the International Residential Code. And because of this, this was kind of a round peg in a square hole. So if you had a townhouse that was consisted of 3 stories, for example, say you had a basement 2 stories or maybe 3 stories above grade, and you put your furnace in the basement and you extended your ducts within the dwelling unit 3 stories, under the current code, it would say you need to have a fire rated shaft, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we've added language to address this. So now if you have an individual dwelling unit connecting up to 3 stories, you don't need to have a rated shaft, but you do have to protect the ductwork with non-combustible material that resists the free passage of flame and products of combustion. For those of you who are involved with hospitals and or nursing homes, smoke dampers are not required in Group I2 duct penetrations of smoke barriers in fully ducted HVAC systems. So another new requirement. Sprinkling language for assemblies. Now this is, as you know, over the years, we've based a lot of changes and requirements for sprinklers based upon a lot of our petitions for variance. And we've input now multiple means by which a sprinkler system is not required to be installed in certain building occupancies. This is an extension of that. We have tightened up the reins on some of it. Some of it we've extended it. But immaterial, the point is that the Wisconsin amendments allow a reduction in criterion for sprinklering on multiple building types and occupancy. So let's start in and see where it leads us. We've changed some of the wording here, and it is addressed under the A1s, A2, A3. A1 is theaters, assemblies. A2 is eating and drinking assemblies. A3 is a general assembly. An assembly, by the way, is 50 or more people. If you're less than 50, by default, it is a business occupancy. So let's take a look at the first one. An automatic sprinkler system shall be provided where one of the following conditions exists, and the language has been changed. The fire area containing the A1, in this case theater, occupancy has no stories that include a level of exit discharge. So if you have that scenario, you need to sprinkler the building. Additional modifications to language. In the past, when we had schools K through 12, the threshold for the need for sprinklering was based upon a fire area of 20,000 feet. Please note that will now be reduced to 12,000 feet. So if you have an educational occupancy and the fire area is over 12,000, you do need to sprinkle. The other trigger is that if the Group E fire area has an occupant load of 300 or more, so either 12,000 square feet or an occupant load of 300 or more will trigger the need for sprinklering in an E occupancy. This exception was in the code. We're just changing one element of it, and it deals with sprinkler systems on multifamily dwellings. And in lieu of having a 13 or 13R system, the system can use a 13D domestic system. In other words, there's no water pump. It's just going to come right from your domestic water. And it's allowed as if you meet all this criteria, 1, 2, and 3. And you'll see 1 has changed. And instead of allowing this to be addressed with a 13D system for 20 dwelling units, it's now been limited to 4 dwelling units. Note that the other criterion hasn't been changed, that item 2, the multifamily dwelling is not more than 2 stories, and 3, that the municipal water system is not available. So one of the modifications for sprinklering for the design community. Another one involves automatic sprinkler systems installed in Group R3 and R4. Condition 1 and R4 Condition 1. Condition 1 implies capable of self-preservation without assistance. R4 also addresses those scenarios where you have greater than 5, but no greater than 16 occupants, as it involves townhouses, meeting the separation requirements listed in 1 and 2, shall be permitted to be installed throughout in accordance with, again, NFPA 13D. This is in substitute of using a 13 or a 13R system. And the two criteria is the townhouse is 3 or less stories above grade, and that each dwelling unit within the townhouse is separated from other dwelling units by at least a 1-hour fire-rated separation barrier. Now, this has been in the code, but I need to do some explaining here. So let's just go through it. Townhouses meeting the definition of the IBC Chapter 2 and satisfying the requirements of subdivisions 1 and 2 may be constructed without an automatic fire sprinkler system if the townhouse is less than 2 stories above grade in height and each dwelling unit within the townhouse is separated from other dwelling units by at least a 2-hour fire-resistive rated separation wall constructed per 706, which is a firewall construction. Separation wall does not have to comply with the structural stability requirements of the IBC 706.2. In other words, you can allow the trusses to go across through this 2-hour wall assembly, unlike a normal firewall. But before I continue, this is based on a state statute that is still in place, probably should be removed depending on where you stand on the particular wall of discussion. But it's been in place for quite some time, which allows 2-hour separations in a residential building. If you have each unit separated by 2 hours, that the building does not need to be sprinklered. So we extended this particular exception into the code. Now, please note the note at the bottom. So we just discussed the fact that we don't need to sprinkler, assuming we meet this criteria. And the note says exceptions to sprinkler requirements found in 101.14.4M and the state statutes, and this section apply only to 362.09.03. In other words, just the sprinkler section. And they don't affect other sections of 361 to 366 or the IBC. What does that mean? The intent is this is specifically to address sprinklering only. You can't come back and say, well, this section of the code exempts me from sprinklering. So when I go to egress under table I1006.2.1, I can't call the building sprinklered. It is a non-sprinklered building, and thus there is no common path of travel. This is important because that means that every occupied room requires 2 means of exit. That includes bedrooms, living spaces, and kitchens. It does not include storage closets and bathrooms. This particular amendment has been added and suggested at the suggestion of our sprinkler and fire alarm group, and it basically identifies what is expected for sprinkler protection on balconies, decks, etc., depending on, of course, the construction of the particular balcony and the type of construction of the main building. If the main building is of type 3, 4, or 5 building construction, they can apply 705.231 exception 3, which allows for the use of type 5 construction for the balcony. However, if the building is sprinklered, and I'm making an assumption that this is very likely a residential or building because it talks about patios of dwelling units, it then goes on to identify how the sidewall sprinklers are to be installed for that balcony or deck area. Now, when we talk about municipal water system, the Department of Natural Resources has a definition of what is a municipal water system. And you'll find that in 81102. Typical municipal water system is that which is located directly adjacent to or across the street from a property where the commercial building is located, and the property is able to be served by that municipal water system. Again, this language was in the code previously. We've tweaked it slightly. we've performed some modifications. So no sprinkler systems required if no municipal water, in other words, there's no local municipal water available, and it's a group 2 occupancy. A2 is assembly, eating and drinking, that is not already exempt under the IBC. In other words, the IBC is written, didn't give you an exemption. You're going to meet this, assuming you meet all of these. And you'll notice that we didn't have a limitation to a single A2 fire area. There is now. You also note that it used to be allowed to have a 12,000 square foot fire area. There's a limitation of 5,000 feet now. The occupant load was formerly 300. The maximum occupant load now is 200 for that fire area. Building height is the maximum of 2 stories above grade. Required exits that do not exit directly to grade shall be enclosed with a fire-rated construction. Note that a minimum of 3 exits are required from each story. Again, this is so you don't need the sprinkler. And what was added this year, because we had scenarios where people would build basements, and of course there was question, well, there was a windowless basement, do we need the sprinkler or not? So we've clarified that if this particular type of building has a basement, you still have to apply the provisions of IBC 903-211, which is windowless stories. Now, if you have 1,500 square feet of basement or less, it's not an issue. But if you exceed 1,500 square feet or more, you'll either have to sprinkler or have windows or door access for the fire department as defined in that code section. Again, we had similar language in the past. We're tweaking it a little bit. No sprinkler systems required if no municipal water, and it's a single story group R occupancy building located in a camp where all of the following apply. So here's your camp. If you can mate an address A, B, C, D, and E, you don't need to sprinkler the building. Now, usually those camps are considered to be residential buildings. The buildings use less than 180 days per calendar year, or equal to 180 days. The building is limited to a single fire area less than 2,500 square feet. And as now noted as part of the language of the code, restrooms serving the cabin are considered as part of the R occupancy for the application of this code section. The occupant load of that single fire area of 2,500 square feet is limited to 50 people. The fire area needs to be located on floors with exit discharge at grade. So this does allow you to build a building, maybe a multi-story building, into a hill, right? Where you would get to add grade on either story. Lastly, what was added is that all sleeping rooms have a direct exit to the exterior. In other words, if there's a fire, you got a directional out of the building. You don't have to go back through the building to get out. Now, if you meet any of those items listed in the code under parens 18, such that you don't need to have sprinklers, right? Maybe because of the lack of municipal water and you meet all the criterion, there are additional requirements that need to be facilitated. You need to identify the occupant load for the space. All open flames, including smoking, shall be prohibited in the building and less than 50 feet from the building. In other words, don't have an open pit from the building except flame equipment used to reheat or maintain food temperatures. Now, we've added language. It says in this section, open flame means a candle, solid fueled fireplace, or other similar flames. It does not refer to permanently installed listed fuel fired heating and cooking equipment that was installed in compliance with all applicable building codes at the time of installation. Let's go back. Earlier, I talked about an A2 occupancy, which could be built without a sprinkler system. And as long as you met all the criteria, this is an additional requirement. So if that was a wedding facility, Please note, you can't have candles. Can't have a fireplace, okay? At any time. Not just because I built it today and the owner chose not to do it the first year, but boy, he's got those beautiful candles out the second and third year. Don't do that. As part of these additional requirements, there's some additional criterion addressed for A2 occupancies, again, eating and drinking. So if you have a scenario where you're exempting yourself from sprinklering, you'll see that you need to have automatic detection utilizing smoke detectors unless ambient conditions prohibit such installation. The spaces where smoke detectors cannot be utilized due to ambient conditions, approved automatic heat detectors shall be permitted. So even though you're getting out of a sprinkler system, the reality is you're going to have a substitution of some kind of an automatic detection system in the building, a fire alarm system, okay? Now that was for an A2, this is for residential. So if you have a building that is exempted from being sprinklered, again, in a similar language, automatic detection is required to be installed in all interior spaces of the building. Automatic detection shall utilize smoke detectors unless ambient conditions prohibit such installation. And where smoke detectors can't be utilized, again, you are required to use approved automatic heat detectors. As we continue with the additional requirements, extinguishers, as is always the case, need to be installed in the building. And for those of you who are looking to use these amendments to get out of sprinklering, you need to have a position statement completed by your code official, typically the fire department, so that we have verification that indeed there is no municipal water available. They can also add that they agree or disagree or approve or disapprove of the building being without sprinklers. And they may have reasons which they will provide. And this statement must, no questions here, it must accompany your plans. If not, it'll be held, it'll be a learning experience. We reference stories without openings under some of the criteria of getting exempted out of sprinklering installation. We did tweak the language in 903-211 with a Wisconsin amendment, and what we identified is that windowless stories with all required exits provided directly at grade. Basically, this is a one-story building, is exempt. Okay, so here's a scenario, here's a membrane building, right? Really soft walls, right? Usually don't put windows in these type of buildings, you just have exit doors, and you can kind of see here in this pictorial, it was given to me by Jim Michek. If you have a story at grade with the required exits provided and it's windowless, we are not require a sprinkler system in that building. This particular note addition clarifies the woodworking scenario. In the code, it requires that woodworking operations involving over 2,500 square feet be sprinklered. Now, please note, they didn't say 25 square feet of fire area. They said just 2,500 feet of woodworking area. So for instance, if you had a factory and the factory was 11,999, how convenient. You're short of the 12,000 threshold for sprinklering. Looks good. But also note that the woodworking area can't exceed 2,500 feet of that nearly 12,000 foot factory area. If you should say have woodworking area where you've got sanding, cutting, planing, etc., all these things that you do with woodworking, and it say is 3,000 feet, even though the fire area is less than 12,000 feet, the woodworking area would exceed 2,500 feet, and the area would need to be sprinklered. This is a new criterion in the code. An automatic sprinkler system shall be provided throughout all buildings containing a group S1 fire area used for the storage of boats and racks, which exceed 5,000 feet. So as you can see here, here's your boats. You've got a racking system. And within here, if you're over 5,000 feet of floor area, this building will need to be sprinklered. Most boats are consisting of fiberglass and thus very susceptible to flame should a fire event occur. We did modify the S2 parking garage, and what we've placed in for condition 3 is where the building area of the open parking garage in accordance with IBC 406.5 exceeds 48,000 feet. Now, this amendment addresses when a sprinkler system is to be installed. Now, typically, the code references the fire area. But in the state of Wisconsin, our definition of fire area does not include the area, those areas under a roof which are not enclosed. Well, if this is an open parking garage, it's not enclosed. So that section of the code doesn't really fit with our definition. So we modified the language just to identify 48,000 square feet rather than call it a fire area. Distilled spirits and wine. There's a lot of that going on in the state right now. I do want to point out this is a $3 million state export in the state of Wisconsin. There's over 30 plus distilleries located everywhere you go, it seems. There's nearly 40,000 jobs related to the spirits and wine industry, and it's growing. So, with that in mind, we need to know how to keep that area and the people working in those industries safe. So what we've added is this amended. When the provisions of chapters 361 and 366 require that a building or portion thereof be equipped with a sprinkler system, fire protection via a sprinkler system in buildings storing distilled spirits in wooden barrels or casks may be installed throughout the fire area containing this type of storage in accordance with an alternate design standard. And in this case, the department's referencing Farmers Mutual ignitable liquid storage in portable containers 7-29 based on the October 2020 edition. So it provides the sprinkler community an alternative design option. And the reason is this: NFPA 30, which is adopted through NFPA 13, which is a sprinkler standard, which is adopted through IBC 903311, does not address within the scope of the standard the storage of wooden barrels and casks in these types of facilities. Thus the reason why the FM 729 was adopted. For those of you involved in fire alarm systems, there's a couple caveats that were created to exempt the installation of a fire alarm fire detection system in the pit of hoistways. And so NFPA 72 has two sections that the department now is not going to require to be addressed. Bleachers, right? We all been to the local school game, the high school game, maybe a club tournament, all kind of athletics out there. Fire alarm systems are not required for open air bleachers with a maximum occupant load of 15,000, where egress from the bleachers is on the exterior and does not re-enter a building to reach the public way. So, you look at this bleacher here, this is from my home community, you can see clearly the egress is the aisles between the bleachers, and of course, as we look off to the side here, right, it's all in the open air. There's nothing that is not in the open air here. So this would not require a fire alarm. When it talks about fire department connections and approval, these Wisconsin amendments direct those people who require those approvals to the local fire chief or designated representative for the local fire department who has jurisdiction with the Wisconsin Fire Code, SPS 314. They will do the approving. We won't. In other words, our plan review staff who performs review of fire alarms, fire sprinkler plans, are not going to define or identify, yeah, this is acceptable, because quite frankly, we don't know the equipment they have. They don't know if they have a 2024 water tanker or if they have a 1954 tanker, which is maybe got a completely different type of fire department connection. So work with the local official and find out what they need for your situation. There are some new directives as dealing with fire pumps, and one of the new exceptions is that fire pumps for automatic sprinkler systems installed in accordance with SPS 3620903 are exempt. Well, that particular code addresses NFPA 13D, and there is no fire pump applicable to a 13D system. Second amendment in this section deals with water supply valves as required by under 913 on a fire pump, where the fire pump supplies either an automatic fire sprinkler system, a standpipe system, or both. It identifies that they have to be monitored. Those of you who design buildings with an elevator, you know that you do need to have two-way communication system. We've now clarified through the new amendment that that communication system needs to be designed per NFPA 72. As a reminder, those of you who are involved in the design of these type of systems, you may be required to address pathway survivability. And if that's the case, of course, then you'll have to address it accordingly. Stairways, always a troublesome issue. A lot of people get hurt on them. A lot of lawyers all over keeping their eyes on stairways. As shown here, we have a platform lift, as many will call it a chair lift, placed on a stairway. Now, I want to make this clear that this is not an acceptable means of egress in a building. And many times where this might come into play is an existing building where they can't afford to put a $150,000 elevator in the building, but they may be able to provide this chairlift on the stairway so as to provide better means of egress for those who may not have, may need additional accessibility. When this occurs, when you add a chair like this, obviously it takes up space, right? You know, what was a stairway, we don't know where the wall is over here, but we've infringed on the width of the stair. And if this is a required exit means, we have to maintain the minimum width of the stair. So you can't just put willy-nilly chair lifts anywhere you want to go. It has to be in a place that, you know, has a wide enough stairwell that by putting this chair, it doesn't impinge on the minimum width of the stair. So the question has always been, well, where do I measure it? Do I do it with the chair up and the foot up, or do I do it with it down? Well, we've clarified it. So now it says the clear passage width shall be provided with the lift in the unfolded usable position, which is what's shown here. Another area that the code kind of missed, but we've got it handled now. But if you have a pit, say you have a service pit, right? You're going to change oil, and you have a service pit. Gentleman goes down, he, you know, loosens up your oil. He drains his oil into a container down below, and of course he's going to climb the stairs to get back up to the main service area. Well, technically, if you read the code, you're supposed to have handrails, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because the whole point is to drive your vehicle up over the top of this oil pit. And so with that, we created an amendment addressing this unique situation. We've identified now that egress can't pass through kitchens, storage rooms, closets, bathrooms, and other rooms where privacy is expected or spaces used for similar purposes. And it's been pointed out to me that this is an exit, and of course there's all kinds of things in the way here, which is another whole discussion. Corridor continuity. Many of you have gone to hospitals, I'm sure, or maybe even clinics where you have a very long corridor, and maybe you have a bump out where there's a couch and a television, maybe a work table, etc. And it's a bump out, but it's part of the corridor. So in order to address that, we call upon the corridor continuity requirements of the code to be addressed. Specifically, other spaces or rooms constructed as required for corridors and that are adjacent to fire-rated corridors may not be construed as intervening rooms and may be open to the corridor when all of the following are satisfied. So the spaces can't be used for hazardous use. Well, that seems pretty straightforward. The spaces are not occupied for incidental uses as identified in what is now Table 509.1. The spaces are arranged so as to not obstruct access to the required exit. So really there's been no change except for this fourth one. If you had a room and you had simply a door on a wall going into the room, I won't even call it a door, let's just call it an archway going into the room. And if you had no door, that would be considered continuity from the corridor. But in order now to address it as corridor continuity, the shared wall needs to have at least 50% open to the corridor. So that wall, that adjacent wall between the room or space and the corridor has to have at least 50% of the wall open to the corridor. Failing that, we'll consider that a separate room. Spaces under grandstands and bleachers. Well, the requirements in 1030.1.1, which identify the need for a 1-hour fire-rated separation, shall not apply to open-air bleachers that have independent egress to a public way. So in other words, you don't need to have a 1-hour separation for those areas under the bleachers. Attic entry. Many of you who are involved with fire-rated roof ceiling assemblies, commonly with 5A construction, especially in the apartment industry, more than any of them, where a fire-rated access panel is required to be installed in a roof framing system that has structural members at least 24 inches apart, the opening width may be less than 20 inches where approved by the department or department representative. So make sure you get that approval before you install. Don't ask for forgiveness after. Now, we were talking about toilet and bathrooms. A toilet room shall contain a lavatory and a water closet. Lavatory, sink. Water closet, could be a urinal, could be a toilet, some kind of enclosure. Now, I want to point out, those who are doing schools is probably where our most problematic area is. You need to have labs and water closets as required by code, and the language has not changed. Specifically, SPS 362.29022A states, at least one lavatory shall be provided in each toilet room. So there's your first one. It means every toilet room has a sink. Or in a gender-designated lounge adjacent to the toilet room. So in other words, if you have your toilets for men, you have your toilets for women, you can't put all your sinks on the outside open area. You need at least one in the gendered area. Now, if you need 4 labs for the men and 4 labs for the women, you have to place at least one in the gendered area. You can take the other 3 for the men and the additional 3 from the women. That gives you 6 and put them in an open area. That's perfectly legitimate. But again, your choices are to put a lav and toilet fixture together in a toilet room, every room, or you have to have at least one sink in a gendered area. The others can be in the open area. That status has not changed. Designers, especially those involved with colleges, collegiate buildings, and those involved in educational buildings, please be aware of this limitation. Special inspections. As has been the case since our adoption of the ICC codes since July 1st of 2002, we have not required the special inspection section, in other words, Chapter 17 of the International Building Code. Now, with the adoption of the 2021, ladies and gentlemen, we are adopting Chapter 17. Now, what does that mean? Well, it depends. It may need additional actions on behalf of the supervising professional. It may not. Depends on the occupancy. It depends on the type of building. And in many cases, it depends on the location of the building. So a lot of things in flux here. Now, this section requires that the supervising professional / designer identify third parties to perform the required duties. Now, I'm going to clarify right here, right now, and right on this screen. Third parties may not be the designer of record, an on-site contractor. Now, there's an exception. We'll get to that in a bit. Or the same inspection agency verifying code compliance on behalf of the department or municipalities. In other words, if, XYZ performs the building inspection on behalf of Madison, XYZ may not be participant in the special inspections. It needs to be an independent third party. Now, having said that, these special inspections require an agency to provide proof of being independent, objective, and competent, having the proper equipment and adequate personnel to perform the duties associated with special inspections and testing. Please note at this time, we don't have all of the licensing as typically referenced by the ICC in place in Wisconsin. So it'll be up to the supervising professional to find an appropriate, independent, objective, competent person to do the testing. Also note, the building official is required to determine if the agency is acceptable. The fact that the supervising professional throws something the way of the building official doesn't mean it's said and done. If the building official says, look, that guy has no clue, that woman just doesn't have the experience, that man has not even been in this industry, he's been doing concrete all his life. Well, what's he doing? Structural design on steel. The building official is required to determine if the agency is acceptable based on the criterion and provide documented conditional approval. So in other words, it is up to the professional to provide all of the special inspection reports to the building official. The building official will not be performing that. That needs to be done by a third party. And it is the designer owner responsible to address all of them prior to, for instance, the issuing of an occupancy permit. Now, how do you track that? Well, there are some requirements for the methods of record file storage stipulated in this code section. Now, of course, the question becomes what kind of tests? Well, there's all kinds of different tests. The section outlines inspections and tests required, including frequency and reference standards. Now, one example, a poured concrete slab would require 8 separate tests. Precast would require 4 separate tests. Now, please note, this is the baseline, and retesting and reinspection, if necessary, would add to these baseline verifications. Now, another item of note, now some of you are probably panicking, don't do that. One of the important items I want to point out, remember I talked about, it all depends on your occupancy, type of building, and where it's located. And one of the big issues is seismic. Most, 80–90% of the state of Wisconsin is in seismic zone A. Very little concern. There's only a slight portion of the state in seismic design category B, and that's typically found in the southeast corner of the state. That's down in the Racine, Kenosha, down in that little corner of the world. The vast majority of the state is seismic design A, which for the most part exempts a lot of the special inspections. So feel a bit of relief in that. Now, I had mentioned a little bit about contractors not being allowed to be a third party. Let's discuss that a little bit. The owner or owner's authorized agent other than the contractor shall employ one or more approved agencies to provide special inspections and tests during construction as required by IBC 1705. Approved agencies are to be identified to the building official. The building official will tell you if that individual is acceptable or not, or maybe he needs more information. Hey, what kind of licensing? Do you have an engineer on staff? Who's your representative? Who's my contact person? What jobs have you done to justify that you're adequate and have the experience and knowledge to perform this testing? Those are legitimate questions. It's almost like a resume of sorts. Now, there are some exceptions. You know, one of them is construction minor in nature. Of course, everybody's going, well, what's that? What's minor in nature? Well, we're working on that. As with anything, especially when you're dealing with new code, I've been here 30 years. There's never been a code that's put in place that all the answers are in place. This is no exception, and this is one of the items that the department's going to be taking action on and providing greater guidance. But it is an exception. It's a construction minor in nature, and if that's a minor in nature construction, you won't need to take on these special inspections. Some additional exceptions include U occupancies related to residential, cold form steel light frame construction per IBC 2211 or conventional wood light frame construction per 2308. They would be exempt. And then the last item, again, we've talked about this contractor. I've kind of hinted at it. The contractor is permitted to employ the approved agencies where the contractor is also the owner. That's a very unique scenario, right? They're building their own building. They own the buildings. They're acting as an owner. So the contractor is permitted to employ the approved agency where the contractor is also the owner. Now, again, special inspections under 1705 establishes thresholds for requiring special inspections and tests, which include exceptions for construction of a minor in nature. Again, don't have all the answers on this. We'll be working on it. We'll be providing it to you. Keep your eyes open. Be attendant to the multiple trainings that'll be coming up and discussions. We will have something out on minor in nature going forward. Basically, this particular section establishes the qualifications for the special inspector as well as the content and format requirements for reports, which are required to be vetted and collected by the building official. Please note, the building official is not performing the inspections. It's done by a third party. He's just going to collect the results. All of them. Of course, then the next question is, what kind of tests? Well, there's multiple tests out there, and you can see here I've tried to address several that I found in the code. This is not necessarily a complete list, but you can see we got concrete, welding, masonry, glass masonry, milk glass, if you will, wood, precast, mass timber, cast, as it involves helical foundations, cold form steel, light frame construction, structural steel, sprayed fire-resistant materials, floor and roof wall assemblies, bond strengths, mastics and intumescent fire-resistant coatings, EIFS materials, and smoke control systems. And for those who are involved in the pre-construction load tests, they would be looking at deflections, wall and partition assemblies, exterior window and door assemblies, skylights, and sloped glazing assemblies. And again, under various circumstances, not necessarily all. So I do want to point out the special inspections is new to the state of Wisconsin. It's going to be new to all of us. There's going to be a learning curve. We are working with individuals from the state of Minnesota, which already require this. They do have some materials that they're providing to the state of Wisconsin. Design professionals, I want to inform you that you need to have on the plans identification of what inspections shall be required for your building. That way, there's no questions as to what the expectations are. So again, I will say the design community shall include on the building plans identification of the various inspections required for their particular building constructed under the 2021 I-codes. Failing that, the plans will be held, providing another learning opportunity. Moving on, there is some criterion for addressing load-bearing values of soils. We have made an amendment, footnote C, values to be multiplied by 0.5 for saturated soils. We've added saturated soil as evidenced by the presence of redoxamorphic features or other information. I have to admit it, I didn't know what redoxamorphic was, so I looked it up. And it's the reduction and oxidation chemical reaction and the resulting appearance or morphology of the soil horizon. Examples include iron, manganese, and others as resulting by complex biochemical processes. Take iron, for example. Iron which is exposed to air will rust. It'll oxidize. Many of you have seen coppers. Coppers normally, like a copper penny, is a nice, a shiny copper penny. But as time progresses, it gets dull. And in fact, if you have copper and you retain it long enough, it'll turn green. It oxidizes. So that's what this is all about here, where your soils are saturated by some way as based on some of the interactions and chemicals for that particular site. Water resistive barriers, this is a clarification as to where those need to be located. And we modified the language slightly. The vertical leg of any flashing at the base of an exterior wall that includes 2 layers of water resistive barrier shall be installed in a manner that places the vertical leg of the flashing beneath and behind both layers of water resistive barrier. This requirement was already in place, but we've clarified the wording as to the expectation in the field for the contractor and inspection community. Drinking fountains. We've allowed in the past reasonable alternatives to, say, a water fountain, a bubbler, et cetera, depending on where you are in the state. So we just clarified this and added examples are bottle fillers, right? If you got a big 5-gallon bottle, usually at bottle and you flip it over, right? You've seen those and they've usually got cups nearby. I've seen bottled water. For instance, I had my car repaired. There's a refrigerator located on a small table where I can open up the refrigerator, grab a bottled water. I have my handicap accessible clearance in front of the refrigerator. I have reach height is correct for accessibility. So you certainly can put bottled water just out on the table, or if you will, in a refrigerator, as long as it's made in an accessible manner. And of course, bar service. Some fixture calculations, exception 2 involving the use of facilities designed to serve all genders was not included as part of this code. And examples and applications of this rule are outlined in the state statute. So we could not overcome state statutes. It's a rule that's in place. An item of unique discussion, the required public facilities must be provided on site or an adjacent site under the same ownership. And this came about due to some plans that were directed to the department for review. Specifically, it addressed an individual who had a building on one side of the street, and he was going to, he went to the adjacent, in this case it was a McDonald's, who was open 24 hours a day. And as part of his plan review said, well, we're going to use their toilets. I talked to him. They're open for 24 hours a day. I don't need to have any in my building. So we created this rule, and basically it eliminates the justification for use of a 24-hour restaurant facility across the street on property owned by a different individual. Restroom equality. I took this picture when I was doing national qualifiers, and of course the bathrooms were well used and had very long lines. And in the state of Wisconsin, we have a very unique rule, and we call it internally here potty parity. You won't find that listed in the code, and you won't find it in state statutes, but that's how we address it internally. Here's potty parity. And in the statutes, it says public facilities which meets the requirement of 101, 128, 3, and 4, basically an assembly of over 500 people, must provide sufficient number of toilets and fixtures to ensure women have a speed of access equal to that of men at the maximum capacity under 101, 128. Now, in the state of Wisconsin here, because of that statute, we do have rules that address this scenario. And in fact, it's found in 362.2902, parens 1, parens D. And wherever more than 500 people congregate and more than the required minimum number of toilet fixtures or water closets, urinals, are provided for males, twice as many of those additional toilet facilities shall be provided for females. Wow, what a tongueful. What that's saying is, let's say you need 4 fixtures for the men and you need 4 required fixtures for the women. So you got 4 and 4. And let's be honest, urinals don't take up much space. You probably could put maybe, instead of 2 toilets and 2 urinals, you probably get 2 toilets, 3 urinals. Okay, the extra fixture over and above the 4 required can be of any nature. It could be urinal, could be a toilet, but it is an additional fixture. According to the rule, potty parity, I have 1 fixture over and above the required number for the men. And according to potty parity, if I have over 500 people, if I've given the men 1 extra toilet fixture, I need double that, twice as many for the women. So if the women require 4 toilet fixtures and I give the men 1 extra one, I have to give the women 2 extra for a total of 6 toilet fixtures in order to be code compliant with our state statute. Please note this is not going to be applicable in Minnesota, Iowa, California, anywhere else in the United States. This is specific to the state of Wisconsin. It actually was created based upon County Stadium and the very, very long lines for the women in that structure at that time. And since then, due to the legislative actions, we have had potty parity to try to balance application of the code. We did tweak the language under hoistway enclosures. Really nothing imperative. It's really not going to change a whole lot. It just creates clarification. We needed to have fire department emergency access to all floors in an R2, and that's correct. However, what we didn't say is that there's an exception if that passenger elevator is serving only floors within a single dwelling unit, and we've now included that language into the code. It's a very special circumstance. Looking at the appendix, we've modified the provisions which are applicable to the commercial building code here in Wisconsin, such that we've added M and O, okay, to the building code. Changing codes now. Now, we were in the building code. We're going to change hats. We're going to go to the energy conservation code. So this is 363, and exterior design temperatures and cooling temperatures are as specified prescriptively under 363.0302 Or as you can see here now, it's been added that you can use ASHRAE 90.1 2019. Please note, we want a cut sheet for the location within the state where you are using those design temperatures. Don't simply just put them on your plan. We want a cut sheet identifying where you're finding that so we know the reference if you choose not to use table 363.0302. Building envelope. Many of the items that many of you were familiar with, the use of the IECC 2009 on multiple Wisconsin amendments, those are all gone. All those amendments are gone. The vast majority of the amendments that formerly were with the Energy Code are gone. There are very few amendments in the Energy Code. I'll say again, there are very few amendments in the Energy Code. Anything to do with the 2009 is gone. We're dealing with the 2021 as written and published for the most part. There are a few exceptions. This is one of them. Now, in 363.0402, this section requires final commissioning report to be completed and provided to the owner by a design professional approved by the agency for building envelope performance verification. Note that the inclusion of this amendment does not exempt other commissioning requirements of the ICC as related to HVAC and lighting. I didn't do a very good job with that. Let's just start out and say building envelope performance commissioning is not required. Okay, we'll try this again. So we don't have to verify special commissioning and a report and all that for building envelope performance. However, this exemption for commissioning does not apply to the HVAC and lighting requirements of the Energy Code. So this is specific to only the building envelope. Now, many of you know the current code does not require any commissioning of any sort, assuming you stay with the IECC as written. But if you choose to go to the ASHRAE 90.1 2013 edition, you would have been required to commission as per that standard. In the adoption of the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, commissioning is required unless an exception is listed, and this is an exception specific to building envelope. We've now changed the economizer threshold. So those split systems involving cooling, which are greater than 60,000 BTU. So if they're 60,000 BTU or less, they don't need an economizer, 5 tons. If you're over 60,000 and it's a split system cooling, then you do need to have an economizer. Please note all rooftop units, just as before, were always required, if they had cooling, to have an economizer installed. That hasn't changed. With those cooling system installations, if you have a rooftop type unit, fault detection and diagnostics are a requirement of the code, just as they were at the 2015, although we did delete some actions. Note that there's no need to sample the HVAC system's performance at least once every 15 minutes. There's no need to automatically identify and report HVAC system faults, and there's no requirement to automatically notify authorized personnel of identified HVAC system faults. We did a clarification on where insulation and what type of insulation is required. You'll see here we've added a note for the purpose of determining insulation requirements. Ductwork located outside of the building envelope is considered to be located outside the building. This is key for ducts above the insulation in an attic. So as many of us know, if you have a house, for example, and let's assume it's an office building, it's wood frame, there's wood trusses up there. The ductwork could go above the ceiling and be outside of the envelope, right? In that interstitial space above the insulation where the truss cord is, but yet within and underneath the roof. Well, for code purposes, we've now identified that if it's outside the envelope, in other words, the envelope is where the insulation is. So typically insulation is on the exterior walls and in the ceiling. And in this case, if it's a truss roof, it's going to be along the cords on the lying on top of gypsum board, typically. If the ductwork goes above that, that's considered to be outside the building. Now, again, I understand it's still within the attic, but this direction is to say you need to have, for purposes of this code, R12 insulation if that ductwork is exposed outside the envelope. Most of the surface water heating has been directed to plumbing. So you'll see that there's multiple sections here identified, eliminates various sections. Most of them have been directed to the plumbing code for application purposes since they typically deal with surface water heating. Also note at the bottom here, there are some requirements for pools and spas. So if you have a pool in the building, not outside the building, that's not within the jurisdiction of the commercial building code, but if you have a pool within the building, you'll find that we've eliminated some of the rules, not all of them. One of the rules requires the water to be continuously running or rotating, and that's to minimize the opportunity for Legionnaire's disease. The other item is that the code will not allow a blanket to be placed over the top, a plastic heat retention blanket over the top of the pool surface. A major point of discussion for building designers and heating designers, electrical designers, because guess what? All of you need to work together. You got to talk. Design build needs to talk. Did I say design build? Let me say that again. Design build needs to talk. This section, which was formerly exempted due to the Wisconsin Amendment, is now in play. The amendment is gone. Additional efficiency requirements are now part of the code. It adds another 10 to 20% efficiency to each and every commercial building. The intent of this section is to improve the efficiency of the building, giving the designer some options as to where they might take those efficiencies. The point of the section is to achieve a total of 10 credits based on table C4061, 1 through 5. Building designers, you must, notice I'm not giving any wiggle room here. It needs to be on the plan. If not, we'll hold the plan and provide you a learning experience. You need to have on the plan the means by which the credits are to be attained so that we can verify what it is that's supposed to be performed in the field. Don't send us plans and not include these requirements because we won't approve them. We need to know what that is. A decision must be made. You know what? I used to joke about this. Many of you have heard this before, but when you get married, you have to commit. And for this section, the designer of the building has to commit either through means of his design or through the means of others' design as it involves the lighting and the HVAC, what it is they're going to do to meet these additional efficiency package requirements. There needs to be a commitment, and it needs to be in writing on the plan or the specifications. Now for building envelope, if you choose to use ComCheck, IECC 2021 will be applicable. So if you use it, great. Again, this portion of the code, the commercial side, addresses all commercial buildings and those residential buildings 4 stories or greater. So that's one option. Another option to demonstrate performance is to use ASHRAE 90.1 2019. So if you set ComCheck for that, you'll be in and you'll be off to the races. In those circumstances where you have a residential building that's 3 stories or less above grade, your only option is to identify the 2021 IECC, okay, instead of what formerly was the 2015. And then if you don't want to go through the res check, you can do a complete total building performance as addressed under the R405 for these 3-story or less residential buildings. We do have a new definition in the mechanical code. We're switching to the mechanical code. What is dry stored? And so when we talked about the boat storage earlier in the building code, dry stored for purposes of mechanical code, again, is a boat out of water and its storage. Those of you who are involved in healthcare facilities, specifically those that are involved through the application of the rules adopted by the Department of Health Services here in the state of Wisconsin, you'll see that the baseline reference for healthcare facilities is now the ANSI ASHRAE Standard 170 2017, ventilation of healthcare facilities. Note that in both these sections, both 364.0300 as well as 364.0309, 309 deals with temperatures, it's the same reference. You're going to be using the same standard. We did modify the means of activation and sequencing. Now, in the past, we've always required natatoriums, or if you will, pool areas, to have continuous exhaust. Well, no one's going to drain the pool at night and fill it up first thing in the morning. They're going to leave the pool full of water. Thus, the exhaust ventilation need to be continuous, whether there's people in the space or not. Given that concept, we've taken it one step further and added chlorine and storage and handling rooms in order to ensure that the chlorine doesn't build up. We've noted in several buildings where chlorine is retained in these spaces where there's excessive rusting in the space, and it affects some of the structural members of the building if they should be exposed in that storage space. So in addition to pools, now you have chlorine storage and handling rooms, which require continuous ventilation. We did modify the table for natural ventilation. Some of you may appreciate it. Office spaces, which typically have not been recognized for natural ventilation in the past, now will be recognized if the office space is less than 300 square feet. So if you have natural openings such as openable windows, openable swinging doors, and they add up to be at least 4% of the floor area openable on the wall, then you will have met the natural ventilation requirements. So again, this is specific to office spaces less than 300 square feet. If you're over 300 feet, you can't use natural ventilation. You must have mechanical ventilation with outside air and appropriate air change. We did get rid of discos, not many discos going on right now, so we updated the language. We also put on here a new requirement as related to ice arenas without combustion engines, where you have less than 100 persons. And of course, you kind of scratch your head. You go, well, where's that? Well, first off, let's talk about ice arenas, hockey arenas, figure skating arenas. That's what we're talking about. Many of you have seen the vehicle. If you've ever gone to a hockey game or figure skating rink, you'll see that they have to redo the ice because it gets all chipped up. And they use what's a vehicle that many people are familiar with. It's called a Zamboni. And it drives onto the ice, it picks up all the chips, and it lays another layer of water down, which actually adheres to the existing ice and freezes into place. Now, in 2017, the UW-Madison's hockey team went to Lindenwood University in Missouri. It was supposed to be a 2-game series. Nearly 20 players from the UW team were sick and in the hospital because what they finally determined was carbon monoxide poisoning, because the Zamboni, instead of being electric, was still a fuel-fueled machine, wasn't properly tuned and left behind a lot of carbon monoxide, which obviously, if you got a hockey rink, the byproducts of combustion fall to the ground. There's no place to go. You got walls enclosing with glass all the way around the rink. And so the players got sick. They didn't even play the second game. So, as to, where that comes about, that's part of the driving force behind that. So again, only natural ventilation if without combustion engines and less than 100 people. On the other hand, we were looking at the mechanical side of things. We did twist, in addition, this is an extension of natural ventilation, my fault. We did change an issue as it deals with dwellings, single and multiple. And you'll notice in yellow here, just to put an emphasis on, kitchens no longer are allowed to use natural ventilation. No windows, no doors. You must have exhausts from the kitchen. Keep that in mind when you get those residential buildings. You have to have mechanical exhaust. No natural ventilation anymore. Not allowed. Now, in follow-up to that, as we go to table 3640403, we did tweak the mechanical requirements to match the national requirements. So what was 100 CFM intermittent mechanical exhaust, which could be controlled with a toggle switch on the wall, you now, you still can use that. The other option was to have 20 CFM continuous. Well, that no longer is the case. At the national level, they require 25 CFM, so we modified our code to complement that which is at the International Mechanical Code. So, just to reiterate, if you have a dwelling unit or a guest room where there's a kitchen, you cannot use natural ventilation. You must have mechanical ventilation. The mechanical ventilation shall include either 100 CFM intermittent exhaust. This could be a ceiling exhaust fan. It could be a range hood. Doesn't have to be. Could be a sidewall exhaust fan. But it has to be located in the kitchen, operated by a switch. It's either 100 CFM intermittent, or if you choose to go continuous, well, then you don't need a switch. It just needs to be continuous. Typically, the continuous exhausts are intertwined with a air-to-air heat exchanger. This is an important point for the design community, contracting community, inspectors, plan reviewers, designers. You get the whole, it's a big issue. Another issue of importance is corridors in the past were considered to be non-occupied spaces. We did not require ventilation in a corridor. That has changed. We now require 7.5 CFM of outside air per 100 square feet of corridor. So, residential buildings probably being the most obvious, but obviously even office buildings now require to have ventilation. Now, if it's a non-fire rated corridor, it's really not a big deal, in my opinion. Yeah, there's additional a little bit of ductwork, etc., but not a big deal. But if you have a fire-rated corridor, building designers and HVAC designers, you need to be careful, because you need to have fire and smoke dampers at every penetration to the corridor enclosure. Fire-rated corridor enclosures penetrated by a duct require fire and smoke dampers, unless you meet an exception in the code. Nail salons in the past, the code has had requirements. We softened them up and said, hey, look, the exhaust inlet can be located in the work area. It could be in the ceiling, on the wall. The exhaust could be anywhere in the nail salon. With the adoption of the 2021, this language has been removed, and now IMC 50220 is applicable. And now the language states, manicure tables and pedicure stations not provided with factory installed exhaust inlets shall be provided with exhaust inlets located not more than 12 inches horizontally and vertically from the point of chemical application as required by IMC 50220. Not that there's a lot of nail salons throughout the state, but for those that are involved with those nail salons, note that the language has changed. We did tweak the exhaust outlet location language. We added some wording just to clarify all the locations. The bottom of an exhaust outlet shall be located at least 12 inches vertically from the adjoining grade level, adjacent roof, and the bottom of an areaway. Additional clearance may be required so as to address local weather conditions and surrounding land contour.
If you're up in Superior, I don't think you want to only have 12 inches clearance because I know you're going to get a lot of snow up there. So this provides a minimum, right? At least 12 inches. But if you know you're going to have more snow, it is encouraging you to use good design judgment to have more than 12 inches. Under the 2015 code and previous codes, we exempted the minimum exhaust requirements for a Type 2 hood used above a dishwashing appliance. We've removed that amendment. So if your dishwashing appliance has, hot water, steam, you need to exhaust those, and you need to have a Type 2 hood, if that's your choice, that has at least 100 CFM per linear foot of hood length. Now, I do want to point out, in lieu of a Type 2 hood with exhausts, there is an exception under 5073, which allows the loads established from the dishwasher, the heat loads, the moisture loads, to be addressed and incorporated into the HVAC system. That is up to the designer and needs to be identified with the plan so that we know that's the means by which you're attempting to demonstrate code compliance. Don't assume we know that's your intent. We'll assume that an exhaust hood is required unless you provide an explanation and appropriate calculations identifying that you're taking the exception. HVAC community, please pay attention to these next 3 slides. This is very important. It's in place. Some of you may not be aware of it. Hopefully when you walk away, at least you can ask and be aware of some of the situation being presented. First off, in the gas code, plastic venting systems. Okay, what's a plastic venting system? Well, a lot of it has to do with a direct vent sealed combustion system, but it can go beyond that. There's other venting systems that go beyond a direct vent sealed combustion system. So if you have plastic venting as associated with gas-fired appliances, it needs to meet UL 1738, inclusive of the specific testing, marking requirements of the pipe, fittings, and cement. And you're like, it's a standard. What's the big deal? Okay, you asked. There's been an update to ANSI Z2147, which addresses the use of gas furnace cellular core venting materials. As part of this update, ABS and PVC cellular core venting materials no longer are allowed when compliance with ANSI Z2147 2022, which was effective as of December 1, 2022, is required. Now, this standard includes 1738. And thus, if we're going to mandate, which the state does, they need to meet UL 1738 immaterial if the listing on the appliance, whether it's a furnace, a unit heater, a boiler, right, all infrared heater, right, all these appliances. Even if the listing says, well, you can either do it this way or with PVC piping, etc. Okay, our code is more restrictive, and it will not allow you to use ABS and PVC cellular core. This is applicable to not only new equipment, furnaces, boilers, unit heaters, but also equipment replacement. So this is a big deal. It's a big deal because if you have a furnace that had its venting installed 5, 10, 15 years ago using ABS or PVC cellular core, it has to be removed if the equipment has been constructed based upon the Z2147 2022 requirements. So again, where gas-fired central furnaces are being replaced, existing ABS and PVC cellular core venting materials must also be replaced. Now, there was some testing done, etc., that At the national level, they were able to justify that ABS and PVC cellular core were not viable, as has been in the initial intent, and thus the reason the changes in the industry. So, very important point for those of you who install, but also who replace HVAC equipment. There are some new rules for smoke detection. These were driven by the Department of Health Services, and it's based upon NFPA standard 90A. Now, in the building code for smoke detection system installation, we put the smoke detection on the return air side. Because if there's smoke and fire in the building and there's return, it's going to go back through the return and trigger the smoke detection. Excuse me. On the other hand, DHS looks at it very differently. Remember, these are hospitals and nursing homes. So they don't even want the dirty air to get in the building. So they put their smoke detection on the supply side. So if you're dealing with hospitals, nursing homes, and many of you may be aware of it because this has been an issue at time, it's going to be codified here. It says based on the rules at DHS and also per NFPA standard 90A, which is adopted by DHS, 4.2.4 for air handling units between 2,000 CFM and 15,000 requires supply duct smoke detection installation. Additionally, DHS has additional rules that refer to the NFPA standard 90A 4.3.10 for smoke dampers isolating air handling units. And so, of course, the first question is, okay, 4.3.10, what does that mean? Well, if you look it up, it's applicable to systems with a capacity greater than 15,000 cubic feet per minute, and the smoke dampers are required to be located on both the supply and the return sides of your equipment, typically rooftop units. So again, this is DHS rules that we've incorporated into the building code to make sure that everyone's aware of some of the rules at DHS. We talked about this earlier. It's in both the building code as well as the mechanical code because it deals with mechanical code issue. The building code, by the way, is the primary reference for fire and smoke dampers and their installation, fire-rated shafts, all of that. The mechanical code is a secondary, so we've put it in both the primary and secondary references for everybody to see. Some reference standards have changed. NFPA 45, which is used for fire protection for laboratories using chemicals, has been updated to the 2019 version. And again, as we noted, ventilation of healthcare facilities is the 2017 version. There were some changes made in the existing building code. Now, the existing building code is applicable to those buildings that were constructed under the commercial code, and now you're going to make a modification to that building in some way. Maybe change of occupancy, change of use, maybe an addition, maybe an alteration, right? All kinds of things. Maybe even a repair. All of these are covered in the International Existing Building Code. At present, our commercial building code does not require the need to create storm shelters. Designers may choose to design a building with a storm shelter using the requirements of the building code, but the rules as adopted don't require the design community to do that. It is by their choice if they choose to put a storm shelter in. With that in place, going to the existing building code, since we don't require a storm shelter to be built in a new building, why would we require it to be built in a existing building? So there is an exception. There are some rules in the code, again, addressing by state statute the need for additional accessibility requirements. And thus, under 101.132, it does provide some guidance as to those housing requirements as to, are you changing more than 25% of the residential dwelling units, 50% or greater than 50%? And depending on what you're doing, there are some requirements that the statutes mandate that you follow. For those of you using the existing building code, it's got a new look. You're going to be confused. I certainly was. Everything is up one chapter. And what was formerly chapter 3, well, it's still chapter 3, but it addresses handicap accessibility requirements. So all the things that you found in 705.2, addressing, making an existing building more accessible and disproportionality, right? 20% of the overall project had to be placed towards making the building more accessible unless you met the disproportionality requirements. Those are all found now in chapter 3. So if you think it left, it didn't leave, it just got relocated. And everything else got moved up by a number. So what was chapter 3 now is chapter 4. What was 5 now becomes 6. You get the idea. We did add a few additional amendments here. This is a department rule in addition to the requirements in IEBC 12011. Any historic building is exempt from the energy requirements in 361, 366, except as follows. So let's just think about this. This is an existing building. Do we really want to dismantle the plaster walls, etc., to get insulation into this existing historic building and ruin the aesthetics of the historic nature of the building? The answer is no, we don't want to do that. So, of course, the next question is, well, now you're requiring me energy code requirements. How am I supposed to maintain the aesthetics of this historic building? Well, I think they did a pretty good job, they being the committee. They said, look, if an existing ceiling, wall, or floor cavity is exposed during alterations, it needs to be filled with insulation. That doesn't say what kind, what R value. It just says filled with insulation. Okay, can't be hollow. Now, it's only required where it's exposed. So if you don't expose a wall, you don't have to insulate. Continuing on, all replacement skylights, windows, door assemblies shall meet the minimum code requirements of the IECC, right? So I'm going to take an old window out, right? It's a single pane. It's an old building. It's historic. Unless you have to meet the current code, unless specifically designed to address unique aesthetics associated with the historic nature of the building. Okay, let's take a church, right? Church might have stained glass. It's unique. That's clearly not a listed, tested assembly. It was done, on the fly 10, 50, 100, 110 years ago, right? If you replace that or with new stained glass, or if you come back and modify it, maybe you're going to, clean some of the glass or maybe some of the lead that was used in between the various panes of glass, right? We're not going to hold you to the current code for that glass in that historic building. Additionally, this section says glass-only replacements in an existing sash or frame are exempt from the application of the IECC. As a kid, I was playing baseball with my sister in the backyard, and of course, the infamous Brady Bunch situation. I swung, I hit the ball, but it deflected backwards and went right into my bedroom window. I wasn't real popular when my dad came home. But the point is that we didn't replace the entire window. We just replaced that portion of the window which broke. Okay. Lastly, roofs without insulation in the cavity and where the sheathing or insulation is exposed during re-roofing shall be insulated either above or below the sheathing so as to meet the minimum insulation required by the IECC, or shall provide insulation to the greatest extent possible. So in other words, if you can't get 12 inches of insulation up there and you can only get 8, well, you put in 8. If you only have 4 inches for that roof for whatever reason, then you only get 4. But it needs to be filled, again, if it's exposed. Again, reports for historic buildings are not part of this building code requirement. We've retained that, so FYI. Now, you've seen the amendments. You're probably digesting them at this point. I'll let you think about that for a bit. But I do want to point out some points here that will be of value to you as we move forward. Some of you may or may not have the 2021 code. Please note the 2021 code is online. It is free. It's not maybe the most user-friendly, but it's free. Free is a four-letter word. Please note it's not a bad word. You can go onto the website. This is the website here in blue. And as you get to the site, you click on the left, you click on iCodes, you go to the right of that, you click on 2021 codes, and then you view all the codes associated for that year. For those of you who like to look at or need to look at old codes and what language might have changed, you can go to the same site and find other years. So if you want to go back to the 2000 code, you can do that. You click on it and you'll see it right online. This is a really handy website. Now, on September 1st, the final version of the Wisconsin amendments will be online. We do not have them any sooner than that. So don't call me, send letters, etc. The department does not control this. This is the Legislative Revisers Bureau, LRB. They are in control of it, and they will release it when they deem it appropriate. Typically, it's on the day of release, which would be September 1st. So the amendments will be available then. You can then go on the state website to download them. You click on commercial building code, find the appropriate SPS. We're going to, as soon as the legislative LRB does their work, we will make the connection with them. Note that if you're familiar with the 2-column layout, you can address that. The legislative language is not very user-friendly. It isn't very tight either. So if you click on the red and white PDF icon button, which is located just to the right of the help statement in the upper right of the screen, use that to get a standardized code layout for printing purposes. So if those of you who are more familiar, you've probably seen this layout in the past, right? 2 columns gives that kind of general administrative enforcement summary. You click on this PDF right here to get this. Otherwise, you get what's listed here, and it's not very user-friendly. It's just a long list. This keeps things pretty compact and much more user-friendly. So when you get to the web page, go to the upper left, click on the first icon next to help, and then you'll get this very nice layout, and then you can print that up, put a 3-hole punch in it, include it with your code package. Now, in addition to finding them online, those of you who will choose to get a copy of the code in a 3-ring binder, doesn't work real well with those with soft covers. It doesn't work well, obviously, at all with those with an electronic version. The department is trying to address various actions for making the Wisconsin amendments readily accessible to designers, contractors, building owners, and code enforcement officials. The department will create and make available insert pages with the Wisconsin amendments addressed. Now, please don't be looking for them on the first day, because remember, we're not going to have a final version until September 1. So it'll probably be a few weeks before they're available. We're working on it. Be patient. When they're completed, they will be made available to the department website, and you can download them from there. These insert pages can be inserted into 3-ring binders of the various 2021 codes near their particular application. I highly recommend that you print them on some kind of a light colored paper, light yellow, light blue, light green, etc. A light color, because then if you choose to copy them on a copy machine, they'll copy well. If you have red, dark blue, dark green, they don't copy very well because they're very dark, and the copy machines don't copy them very well. Now, another option that's being investigated at this point is to incorporate the Wisconsin amendments right into the ICC code application. There has been nothing definite made out of this yet. The inquiries are still just that, inquiries. There is an expense to do that. And of course, the question becomes, is that a value, or is it just simply an expense to the design community? I can't answer that question. The department doesn't have any numbers at this point. We're working to find out what options and what kind of costs will be included should we ask ICC to create a 2021 code with Wisconsin amendments. Again, we don't know what that status is at this time. The inquiries have been made, and the information has not yet been sorted. But that is another option that we are looking at, yet to be finalized, either for or against. Having said all that, I do want to appreciate everybody's time today. It's a very long lecture by all means. I apologize for that. There's a lot to cover. I try to give as much information as possible. But I do want to say thank you for attending today. It's been a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you. I hope many of you have gotten a few notes. I hope you found out a few things that reinforce maybe what you had heard the last time we spoke. We will be having additional training, certainly at the UW Code Refresher. I'll be working with the inspectors for next spring. There may be additional training, touch base with your local inspector groups or other organizations who may be bringing ICC representatives into the state of Wisconsin for a more detailed discussion as it involves the changes in the publication of the 2015 IBC to the 2021 ICC code suites. I think you'll find that very helpful. I'll let you go. Thank you again for your professional time and interest. I certainly wish you the very best. Do your best to investigate as many questions as possible in the code. Note that our building tech line is available for you to make inquiries. We are going to be very busy with a lot of plans here in September. Remember, we're going to assume that it's going to follow the 2015 code if you submit in September, unless you specifically ask us to review it under the 2021. Note that October 1st is the hard date for implementation. If the materials
Randy,
are
I'd like
received.
to add one.
Yep, go ahead.
Hey, Randy, this is Chuck. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but we will be putting a link to this training on our website. Right now, it's on the DSPS YouTube channel. So if you look up DSPS YouTube, you'll find the first training that Randy did 2 weeks ago. We're also going to post this training because I think this is probably your latest and greatest, Randy. If I
Yeah,
wanna
I
speak
cleaned
up
up some
first.
slides too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I think this was probably the most appropriate one to post, but we're working on, we'll be getting that on our website and it should be there within the next, probably by early next week. Thank you.